This is Dimitri Lascaris for The Real News. In 2016, only months after signing on to the Paris Climate Accord and pushing for an aggressive goal of limiting the global temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius, the Trudeau government in Canada announced its approval of two major tar sands pipeline projects. The first of these projects is Kinder Morgan's proposed expansion of its Trans Mountain pipeline, which runs from Alberta to the west coast of Canada. And the second of these projects was Enbridge's proposed replacement of its aging Line 3 pipeline, which runs from Alberta to the western tip of Lake Superior. The Trudeau government's approval of these pipeline projects generated considerable controversy. For example, a leading environmental figure in Canada, Dr. David Suzuki, has condemned Prime Minister Trudeau as a liar, while Bill McKibben of 350.org recently authored an op-ed in The Guardian in which he argued that Justin Trudeau is, quote, a disaster for the planet. In the face of intense opposition to these pipeline projects, the tar sands industry is predictably fighting back. In Canada, the main business lobby group for the oil industry is the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, or CAP. On June 13th, CAP published data that purported to show a desperate need for new pipeline capacity. This is an annual ritual that CAP performs to make the case for new pipelines in Canada. But this year, Oil Change International, a research and advocacy organization that is focused on facilitating a transition to clean energy, took a hard look at CAP's data and came up with some interesting conclusions. Now here to discuss this analysis with us is Adam Scott. Adam is a senior campaigner at Oil Change International, and he joins us today from Toronto, Canada. Thanks for coming back on the show, Adam.
Great to be here.
So Adam, before we get into the nuts and bolts of your analysis of the CAP data, please talk to us about what that data purported to show and how the data is being used by CAP to promote its agenda.
Right, so I mean, CAP, which represents all of the major oil companies in Canada, but especially the large tar sands producers, is really in the business of trying to show Canadians that all of this growth in the sector is inevitable and that it's absolutely essential. And so they've been projecting this false view of the future that continues to see the oil industry grow for decades and decades to come. And of course, this flies directly in the face of everything that's needed to deal with the global climate crisis, the impact that these operations are having on people upstream, living, amongst tar sands operations, and as well on Indigenous rights. All of these communities that are having infrastructure and pipelines forced through their territory. So, CAP has been doing this for a long time, trying to, sell the industry as this massive and ever-growing entity. But, in recent years, as the oil prices crashed, the industry has been struggling, and CAP has really, also struggled to try to keep this this myth alive. And so their most recent analysis really shows, again, that they're trying to argue that we're going to see another 1.5 million barrels a day of new tar sands production over the next 10, 15 years. And it just flies completely in the face of reality.
And according to CAP, this expected increase in production is going to necessitate the creation of new infrastructure to deliver the product to market.
Right. So this is the 6th year in a row that we've tracked. CAP puts out this report every single year in June, and it's the 6th year in a row that they've said we're about to run out of pipeline capacity. We're this close. Only this year, they actually implied that we ran out of pipeline capacity 6 months ago. But of course, there's no evidence to suggest that that's the case. The differential, the discount that is applied to Canadian crude oil is actually, it spikes every time you see pipeline capacity get really tight. And right now, there's no evidence that that's happening. So CAP has been crying wolf and really, intentionally misleading Canadians for a really long time. And they're just trying it again this year.
And so, Oil Change published an analysis of this data and found a number of other inconsistencies and oddities in the data. What else did the analysis of Oil Change show?
One of the things we found is that their estimate of how much space the pipeline system has to move oil has actually been shrinking for some reason. So in previous years, they'd actually listed a higher ability to move oil through pipelines than exists now. And that's in spite of the fact that the pipeline system has actually expanded in recent years. So new pipeline capacity has been added in a few places, but they've clearly trying to manipulate the numbers in a way that allows them to keep making this ridiculous claim that we're almost out of pipeline capacity. As well, we've found that they don't fully account for all of the refineries that exist in Alberta and Saskatchewan that use oil domestically, and there's quite a bit used in those two provinces. But they never fully, account for all of that, and that allows them to sort of say that there's much less capacity in the system than there actually is.
Right. Now, Oil Change has done its own detailed analysis of the actual pipeline system capacity, which I understand is called the Integrated North American Pipeline Model. How does this analysis differ from the CAP analysis, and what does this analysis show?
Well, from everything we can see, our model is far more sophisticated than what the CAP is using. Our model actually looks at the entire pipeline system, including in the US, and it looks at where all the bottlenecks in the system are. So the total capacity of the system isn't just where the pipelines hit the border, it's where the pipelines actually connect the market. And so we're able to sort of see a very clear and transparent picture of where the capacity is in the system, where the oil can get to, where it's being used by refineries, where rail is being used, all of these sort of more complicated questions. But the CAP analysis seems to ignore a lot of that. It seems to really simplify things, and it also seems to manipulate the data in order to reach the conclusion that they want to reach. Our model actually has been showing that there is actually enough pipeline capacity in the system to accommodate all of the growth that is planned in the tar sands in the foreseeable future. And at the moment, with the crash in oil prices, the growth has basically come to a halt after what's currently being constructed is finished being built. And so as a result, there's not this long-term need for new pipeline. It just makes no sense. And in fact, many within the industry have already been noting this. And you've been seeing, if you actually check carefully the statements made by oil company executives, a lot of them have been sort of openly questioning whether or not all these pipeline proposals make sense.
And what is your sense of how policymakers in Canada are treating the CAP data? Do you think that they're accepting it at face value, or do you think that analyses like those of Oil Change International are being given the consideration they deserve by the Trudeau government?
Yeah, I think we've been saying this for a while, and we haven't been fully listened to. I think the problem is, with the oil price crash, the oil industry has been in rough shape, and politicians are always looking for a way to sort of show that they get that and that they're trying to be supportive of the industry. And to many workers who are, legitimately concerned about what's happened to their jobs, there are a lot of layoffs in the sector, and that's important. So politicians are struggling to find a way of looking supportive, and the way that they've been doing it is to say, well, we'll get you a pipeline, which is going to do nothing to help the economics of the industry at the moment. Isn't going to bring back those jobs. Isn't going to really do anything. But it's a very symbolic way of doing that. So that's sort of the big issue we've been seeing is this is an oil industry lobby group. This doesn't represent the actual workers in the field. This doesn't represent the communities that are impacted by the industry. This is just the PR firm basically trying to sell a narrative that is really out of date. Canadians still by and large are thinking that this industry can be the engine of our economy. Well, that ceased to be the case a long time ago. The growth in the future cannot continue, especially if we want to actually meet our commitments to try to fight the global climate crisis. And so, CAP is getting more and more desperate, like a cornered animal. They're lashing out and they're getting more aggressive, and that's why we've seen this complete inability of the industry to acknowledge reality. And it's very disappointing to see politicians buy into that. They're going to end up looking really silly in the end.
Well, this has been Dimitri Lascaris speaking to Adam Scott of Oil Change International about new data from the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers that purports to show a need for additional pipeline infrastructure. Adam, thank you very much for talking to us today.
Thanks for having me.
And this is Dimitri Lascaris for The Real News.